You are experiencing the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast.
It is April 10th, 2024, and welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty, where we're bringing you the people and the organizations fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. Today we have a special show where we have Dr. Michael Rectenwald. He is a professor in the history of science, and so this will be a fun topic. He is also an LP Libertarian Party presidential candidate as well. So he is currently knee-deep in that. So we're going to find out all about that and some of his ideas on some of the key issues out there that would be facing presidential contenders. But before we jump into any of that, let me introduce you to the rest of our panel. In our lower left-hand corner, we have our screaming eagle of freedom, Tim Everett. He is a pilot in the state of California. In our lower right-hand corner tonight, we have Michael Rectenwald, our guest, and my name is Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host today. So first thing, we always start out with a Liberty quote. And since it's near tax time, unfortunately, it just happens to be that time, Michael, when we have you on the show. But we have a nice quote from Ben Franklin. And in this particular quote, most of you have probably heard this. And it's, in this world, there is nothing is certain except death and taxes. So that's the Ben Franklin quote. But we actually have a bonus quote to follow that up with that I thought was kind of clever. And it's Will Rogers had a quote that was on the same topic. And he said, the difference between death and taxes is death doesn't get worse every time Congress meets. So I kind of thought those were very appropriate for this time of season. Do you guys have any thoughts on those before we jump into the topics?
Well, I think Benjamin Franklin's statement is a bit fatalistic. And that is, he thinks taxes are inevitable, whereas I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, that's us libertarian.
Yeah.
Tim, you have any thoughts? Okay. Okay, well, let's jump into the topics then. So first of all, I want to bring up Michael's pages. So this way, if you're watching right now, you'll know where to go to find out more about him if you get cut off or anything else. So it's michaelrectenwald.com. And on this, it shows some of his books and other video material, interviews that he's pulled. In fact, there's his endorsement, it looks like, from oh God, I can't. Judge Napolitano. That's it.
Yeah.
Names just pulled a Biden there. But yeah, so that was certainly a good endorsement that you got there. But so we got this page here. You also have his campaign page as well, Rectenwald2024.com. So you can go there, find out more about his issues and how to help him along on his campaign. And also, too, he has a page on the Mises Institute, Mises.org. So you can find out a little bit about some of his books there. And certainly it's great to see that you have credibility with those guys as well. So anyways, you kind of have an interesting background, and I wanted to find out a little more, give our audience a little bit of a chance to find out more about you, because you apparently were a full-on Marxist. You described yourself as at one point, but over time, I guess that kind of soured at some of the stuff that you were seeing on the campuses. And where you sort of made a big splash was when NYU really tried to squeeze you and censor you. And we have a couple of video clips just so people can see a little bit of a summary of what that was about. So, James, can you play KOL 1?
A professor at New York University has been publicly criticizing the school's on-campus culture of political correctness and safe spaces. He uses the Twitter handle deplorable NYU professor, prof, I should say. Here's an example. Liberalism co-opts the discourse and techniques of radicalism and turns them into devices of mass manipulation. Well, now the university has placed him on paid leave. The deplorable professor, Michael Rectenwald, is with us now.
Okay, so that was a little bit of intro about what it was about. And you had an interesting conversation on this topic, too, with Tucker Carlson, where you talked about an inclusivity panel that came after you. And so I just wanted to play that little clip from that conversation on this same issue. James, can you play KOL number 2?
California spends billions of dollars every year to reduce homelessness. Now some lawmakers want to know why it isn't helping.
Then a committee calling themselves the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Group denounced me.
Of course.
Yes. They denounced me in a doublespeak Orwellian condemnation in which they said I was guilty of for the structure of my thinking. Basically, I had the wrong kinds of thoughts.
So the inclusion committee excluded you.
They excluded me. That's why I call them the Conformity, Inequity, and Exclusion Group.
So
I thought that clip was too good not to use. And by the way, we had a little bit of a confusion there with our clips. I guess our invisible hand is all thumbs today. Anyways, so tell us about your journey to liberty, and what was it that sort of rang your liberty bell and brought you around?
Well, I mean, it was the left itself. It was the Marxists and the other contingents of the left who basically righted me, and I don't mean made me into a right winger, but they righted my vision. They effectively tore the scales of their ideology from my eyes forcibly by exhibiting such totalitarian tendencies. I couldn't believe the way they came down and were so hell-bent on restricting my speech. I was being chastised and castigated in the university for my speech, for extracurricular speech completely outside the classroom. Even if it was in the classroom, it was still nevertheless very troubling that they wanted to shut it down, and I wouldn't allow it. I kept going.
Well, that's awesome. And was it? I mean, did you come through, I guess, with respect to the economic stuff too? Did that sort of tie in with all this?
Yeah, first, I would say first I converted to a civil libertarian by virtue of the fact that I saw that my individual rights were paramount, and that individual rights, without individual rights, you have nothing. So that was the conversion to civil libertarianism, and then I immediately did a deep dive into the economics and political theory as well. And so with those, it really just blew the door wide open. I had a massive gestalt shift. I just saw everything differently. I accounted for the same things and then some. But with a whole different perspective. So it was like a real paradigm shift.
Who was your biggest influence on this stuff to bring you over? Because it's really just fascinating to see a professor, who's an avowed claimed Marxist that suddenly, switch around. It's like, it feels like a miracle.
Yeah, I mean, it's it wasn't reading at first. It was the treatment I received, but then I immediately started to read Mises, and I didn't go to like Milton Friedman. I went right to like what I consider to be to the root with Mises, and then eventually Rothbard, and eventually Hoppe. But there's a whole panoply of others in there that I could mention, just reading articles and books endlessly about this. And delving deeply into the philosophy, the freedom philosophy, and the economic elements of it, the political elements of it, the social elements of it, and the moral, I think, ethical issues, really, really deeply ethical issues that libertarianism addresses.
Yeah. I felt like it's funny you said you bypassed Friedman, because Friedman was kind of like my stepping stone to finding people like Mises.
Yeah, right. Sure.
So I remember I first, got connected to all this through Stossel, listening to his stuff, and then, okay, there's Friedman, and he's talking about Hong Kong, and eventually I went down the rabbit hole, and that's how I found all those guys. But, I would say I ever believed in Marxism for beginning. And so what would be your biggest critique now, looking back on the things you used to think about Marxism?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the main thing is about Marxism is that it claims to be economic democracy. And I recognized after reading Mises in particular that it's anything but democratic. It's anything but democratic at all. It is not economic democracy at all. It's economic tyranny, and it has to be simply because you cannot have choices. You don't have choices in the under socialism. So you get it's dictated by these bureaucrats or these statists of all sorts. They dictate what is produced, and so with the price issue, the calculation problem, I recognize that there's only one way you can have economic democracy, and that's with allowing consumers to vote, and the only way they can do that is by virtue of prices and economic choice, freedom, economic liberty. But it was really the calculation problem that brought down the house of cards of Marxism. And then the investigations into the labor theory of value, which I had just taken as a kind of presupposition. I just assumed it must be right. It seemed like it made sense, and I applied it in different ways. I wasn't teaching Marxism, I want to make that clear. But I was writing as a sort of an avocation, a lot of Marxist essays and stuff like that. And I remember I assumed the labor theory of value was true. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, the labor theory of value is the theory on which the whole edifice of Marxist economics and politics hinges. Once you knock down the labor theory of value, you've knocked out the whole theory of exploitation of Marx and under Marxism. So you have no real cause for the working class revolution because they're not being exploited at the point of production, as Marx contended. So all that sort of crumbled, and then I was doing also a lot of research into the criminality of socialist regimes, socialist and communist regimes. And, everybody knew about the death toll and all that, but there's so much more to it. And, I delved into that, and I became probably one of the most fiercest critics of Marxism there is out there, writing about it in 5 books. At least tangentially, but addressing it in all 5 of my recent books.
Yeah, it looks like you have 5 or 6 books written since I guess you converted from 2016.
I kind of an explosion after I had like a creative and intellectual explosion after I was released from this prison house of Marxism. It just opened up my head, and I started to just let all kinds of things roll, and all kinds of inquiry. I had deep curiosity and deep inquisitiveness about, the truth about this matter. And this is a very serious matter. If you buy into socialism, you effectively surrender your will into slavery. I mean, it's that serious.
Yeah. Now that's one of the things I think most people don't realize about when they think communism, socialism. In the end, you have to have a planner, and once you kind of have those planners, kind of like Animal Farm, the pigs take over, and the game's over.
And you don't have self-ownership. This is the most. This to me is the principal foundation of libertarianism is self-ownership. If you are dictated to by the state about what you have to do every day and so on and so forth, you are suddenly have no self-ownership at all. You're actually property of the state, and that is a stunning thing.
Yeah. Well, speaking of property of the state, I tell you, COVID was, came around not too long after you started your journey, I guess, into liberty. How did that impact your journey toward liberty?
That's a really good question. So I was in California, in LA, when this hit. I happened to just take a hiatus and go, rented out my place and went to LA for a while. Then this COVID crisis comes, and of all places to be, is California, and California. Just, I couldn't have picked a worse place. Of course, I didn't know it was coming. But I remember one night when it was starting to heat up on the news, and I turned to my son and I said, the state is going to crush us. And he said, no, what are you talking about? That's the only thing that can save us now. And I said, no, you'll see. And it's interesting, since the whole COVID thing happened, he's become a full-fledged libertarian as well. And because the COVID thing was just like more of the same. So for me, and I wrote an essay about this, I wasn't surprised at all by the draconian and totalitarian measures that were being imposed on us during COVID, because I saw it as a piece of what I'd seen in general with what was happening in the country, that we were already on this slippery slope on the road to totalitarianism, and that this was just another amplification of it. I'd already written a book called Google Archipelago, The Digital Gulag and the Simulation of Freedom, just before this. And I had written about the rise of totalitarianism in that book. So I wasn't surprised. And I knew that it was going to be, they were going to use this. They were going to seize on this crisis and exploit it for everything it was worth in terms of gaining powers of coercion over us. You know, that's really what was at stake. They're gaining power of coercion over us. And, you know, then it was interesting to see the way big pharma and big tech became sort of accomplices in all this. And kind of a partnership between them and the state. And what that amounted to was first of all, this compulsion for the vaccine, whether legally forced or otherwise, coercion at very least. And then what did the state get out of that? They got increased powers of coercion in exchange for this monopoly that they gave these they gave these pharmaceutical companies. And then big tech and all the censorship. I mean, I'd just written a book about that just before this happened. So I wasn't surprised at all. In fact, it was like boring in a way, because I said, oh, this again? And, you know, the way they were shutting down speech and foisting propaganda at us nonstop. All that, I wasn't surprised in the slightest.
Well, you know, one thing I wanted to ask you too, because being a professor in a history of science, and then seeing what happened with the science during, how did that impact you, I guess?
Well, I had done a lot of, you know, I'd done a lot of work in the history of science. It's not my only field, but that's what I wrote my dissertation in. And so the thing is about what they were calling the science was, it was such an ironic statement, because everything they did was actually to foreclose scientific inquiry altogether. So I found it so ironic that they're calling it the science when what they were promoting was anything but science, because it was in fact dogma that was being unloaded on us. It wasn't science at all. Science is not dogma. It's the opposite of dogma.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Tim. It sounded like you saw you. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm good.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's absolutely.
I should say this about science, though. Science is the opposite of dogma, ideally, but it's never the full opposite of dogma. There's always some dogmatism in science. And it hardens into dogmatism very soon after you get a breakthrough theory. So it isn't like, you know, all science is pure. It's not. But it has this objectivity as a goal, as an object, as an asymptote that it never reaches. But that has to remain that goal. So this was anything but science. This was the most dogmatic, doctrine-laden imposition of dictates. They closed down all inquiry and put people out of work who dared to question what was going on. They vilified the non-vaccinated. I think they violated the NAP all the way with reference to
Non-aggression principle. Yeah.
With inflicting people with a vaccine which they had not taken due diligence to test. That was a very egregious violation of people's rights.
I did think it was kind of interesting how the science at one moment was it takes 5 to 10 years to say a vaccine is safe. Then suddenly the science is, no, that doesn't mean anything anymore.
Science is suddenly, it's accelerated exponentially in the last 5 minutes. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. And it was funny too, watching how the science changed depending upon which political side you were on. Both the Democrats runners, they were very skeptical of anything that Trump might generate, and then suddenly they took credit for it right after he gained office.
I think the best way was to ignore what the political class was saying, because, and the response to them, because what they were saying, except was just the party line, and it didn't matter. So there were those Democrats who said they would never take a vaccine that was issued under Trump, for example. Remember that?
Yeah.
And then they became the biggest vaccine pushers of all.
Yeah, they were wanting to use force and everything. Yeah, absolutely nuts.
This will never be written, I'm afraid. Speaking as a historian here, not as a candidate, what I fear is that this history will never be completely written well, that it'll be written from this regime standpoint, and it'll be crap. It'll just be a version, the same fossilized version of what they said during this crisis, what the establishment said.
Yeah. I think they've done more damage to the credibility of our institutions of science than anything in my memory of being alive with what happened during COVID. I certainly think there might have been some people who were honest in this, but I mean, watching them try to shut down people like Jay Bhattacharya and other people who were real scientific credentials out there, and they were just asking good scientific questions, and the answer was, well, we got to deliver a devastating knockdown to these people and just shut them down.
Everybody, all the signatories of the Great Barrington Declaration, all of them were vilified and some of them ruined. So
and I think that example of the change in mind of Democrats regarding the vaccine before Biden and then after Biden is, it's just so typical of the partisanship going on today with all things. In other words, if it's our guy, everything's hunky-dory, but if their guy does the exact same thing, then, the world is ending. It's the end of democracy. And, oh, my God, the sky is falling. We're all going to die.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. So people would base their idea of the truth totally in terms of their political affiliation. So if Trump said it and you're a Democrat, then it had to be false. If Biden said it and you're a Democrat, it had to be true. If and vice versa. So it's just ridiculous that that has to be very confusing to some people, I would imagine. It's not easy to cope with, but once you understand that these two parties are just two different vehicles for controlling the power and leverage of the state, and they both want to use the state in ways that I think is coercive and oppressive. It's just for their different ends, and they jump on the bandwagon when it's doing some XYZ they approve of, and then they get all up in arms and alarmed when it's something that they don't approve of. But it's the same instrument being used.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of
You're not
feel.
allowed to throw a rock, but we're allowed to throw rocks, right? So I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. I almost feel like I love the analogy that some people use with the parties, this duopoly, and in comparing it sort of to Lord of the Rings, the analogy is the ring being that power of government.
Yes.
Democrats, they feel, I think they're all in on it, and Republicans, they talk a good game, but then when they get a hold of the ring, they say, "We'll use the power of the ring for good." And then here we are, libertarians, we're the hobbits.
Yeah, take as a good example of this is what's his name in Florida?
DeSantis, yeah.
DeSantis, yes. I was going to ask my assistant, but I turned over. She's asleep. I worked her ass off all day. Excuse me. But DeSantis, yeah. I mean, like DeSantis, he wanted, he was up in arms about the woke stuff being imposed in schools and all this. So what does he do? And the censorship coming from the left. What does he do? He uses the power of the state to censor and ban books in the colleges. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So they don't see the irony. And one says the other is fully responsible for cancel culture, but they're both involved in it. They both do it.
Yeah, it's funny because I watched DeSantis over there, and he does make some pushes for school choice. So they've got a lot more school choice options than they have in other places. But on the other hand, some of the edicts that come down from the state of saying, "Hey, you can't teach this in our schools anymore." It's like these things are almost incoherent.
It's incoherent. We're going to relax the state pressures and restrictions on things I like. And then we're going to clamp down on those things I don't like. I mean,
exactly. Well, and speaking of this duopoly and how terrible it is, I guess this was a good segue to talk about why did you decide to run for president? What was it that sort of gave you the spark to do this for the Libertarian Party, the Hobbit Party, as the analogy goes, to destroy that ring of power?
One thing I've always vowed to do in this campaign is to tell the truth about everything. So the fact of the matter is I had never had thought ever in my life of running for political office. It was not even in the cards. I never even imagined it. And certainly I never would have presumed to run for president. I never would have sought such a thing. They came to me and asked me to do it. And what I mean by they is the head.
Sorry. Let me just interrupt real quick. So we're out of time if you're on public access and you're watching this, but you can catch the rest of the show, hear more about Michael Rectenwald's campaign, and find out a little bit about his views on some of the presidential issues as well. So go check that out online. So back to the show. Go ahead, Michael.
Where were we? I lost my train of thought.
Well, we were talking about running and how you were.
Okay, yes, I was recruited to run by the Mises caucus of the party. And I thought when he first called me, I said, "Are you sure you got the right number?" And when he popped this question, because I was like, "Are you kidding me?" I like I said, it never crossed my mind. But
so it was literally like you're Frodo, and they're handing you this ring, and they're saying, "Go destroy it in Mount Doom."
Yeah, and I said, but then we talked it through. I knew all about the Mises caucus, and I'd spoken for the Mises caucus many times at different events, many of them through COVID, throughout that whole time, and talking about COVID totalitarianism and things like that. And when they asked me, I was surprised, somewhat flattered, but wasn't sure. So I thought about it, and after considering it in connection with what their vision for it, it lined up with what I think politically and what I think in terms of economics, and it lined up with my vision. So I decided to embrace it and put my money where my mouth is, because I had written a lot about liberty and decentralization, for that matter, localization, things like that. And but now here was a chance to actually do some work in that area, and I decided to do it.
Well, how is the campaign going? So
I guess other work, I should say. Let me say other work, because I should say that writing articles and books and stuff like that for liberty is work. Let me tell you. So, but go ahead. You were asking.
Oh, sure. Well, I guess I wanted to find out too, how is the campaign going as well? I mean, because everything is, I believe the LP election or the
Nomination.
God, I can't nomination. Yeah, that doesn't that happen in June? I think is that when
May.
it
May.
Okay.
It happens in May over Memorial Day weekend in Washington D.C.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Okay.
so it's shaping up very well. I do have the largest voting block in the party behind me. That's a big advantage, but I've had to perform. And I've actually learned a lot. I've learned a lot about debating and public speaking, about research, and just a lot of things I've had to study. Not that I didn't know libertarian philosophy, but when you get to every issue in the book, when you're running for president, people will ask you about everything. And and you're supposed to have the answer to anything, right? So it has been a lot of study, it's a lot of growth. So personally, it's been a very positive growth experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, as far as sacrifice goes, and how much of a toll is this, and what are the costs like? I mean, if somebody were watching you out here and they're saying, "Well, in the next 4 years, I want to get out there and run," what does it take? I mean, what kind of burden is this?
That's a good question. So, first of all, let me just say that I lost a lot of economic. I lost a lot of income. I lost a lot of sources of income to do this or I should say, because I did it. So I lost my book publisher because of my stance about the war in Gaza, and then I also lost a fellowship with Hillsdale College. I don't know why, they won't say, but I think it's because I'm running as a libertarian, and they have a very heavy Republican donor base. And so they can't be pissing off that base for just having me as as a distinguished fellow. So they cut those. So those two are pretty significant sources of income. And then on top of that, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of travel, and puts a lot of you have to constantly raise money. It's not easy. You got to raise money all the time. Almost every day, you've got to raise money. Besides campaigning and so forth. And I like writing. I like writing. Period. So I luckily I enjoy writing, like fundraising and other emails. I do that myself. I don't have a team writing my emails. I don't like anybody putting anything out in my name that I don't actually write. And so that's just that particular thing. But we're looking good. We're looking very strong right now. I can't really say more.
Not to mention going on podcasts in your evenings here.
Yeah. I mean, we moderate that. We don't take all the requests. We don't fulfill every request. So I should say that you met the bar or exceeded it. But,
well, we're honored that you chose to be on here. So.
Yeah, but I take a lot of them, and I find it fun. It's fun.
Well, if you are fortunate enough to, let's say, win the nomination and then win the presidency, what are the 3 most important issues that you'd really like to tackle if you got to be president?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would do was Javier Milei took a chainsaw to the state. That was his metaphor. Mine's a wrecking ball. So I'm going to take a wrecking ball to the state, and it start to demolish this massive piece, as much of this massive behemoth as possible. We live under the largest state in the history of humanity. I think it's the most oppressed. This state is so. If you count its foreign policies and wars and everything that does to the rest of the planet, and then some. I mean, then the intrusiveness and the continual encroachments on us by this state. We're living under one of the biggest behemoths in history. Now, it's not the worst. We know the Soviet Union was terrible, and Mao's China, and so forth, and some say contemporary China. But this is not the ideal that we aspire to at all.
Yeah. Well, this does bring up a question. James, maybe you could bring up the visual. I was going to ask you how you felt about Malay, because that has to be one of the most inspirational things to anybody running under the libertarian banner nowadays. The fact that somebody who claims to be a libertarian and follow the Mises school actually won the presidency of Argentina.
I think it's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, this is incredible. And apparently he's doing some of the things that he said he would do. And I want to point out that he ran as an anarcho-capitalist, not as some sort of minarchist. He didn't go around talking about limited government. He was talking about, we're on YouTube now, right? I guess I got.
Yeah. YouTube's one of them.
he's saying things like what he'd do with the state. And I will leave it at that. So he's talking, this guy's rhetoric was very, very radical.
Afuera.
And so I am the only candidate that's running, as far as I know. Nobody else has come out as an anarcho-capitalist, but I have. I'm running as an anarcho-capitalist.
Okay. Yeah. I thought maybe Hornberger Hornberg might
he's
be.
A minarchist. He's
okay.
In fact, he just put a video out today, complaining about Angela McArdle, the chair of the Libertarian Party, because she said in some podcast that he was a radical anarchist, and he got furious. I am a limited government guy. So, limited government. Yeah. So I just don't, just speaking on those terms, I just don't think that excites anybody. Limited government. Hey, we're going to reduce the coercion you're under. Thank you. I mean, that's not an exciting message, but so I'm running as a full-on anarcho-capitalist who's promoting the idea of decentralization, localization, decentralized revolution, as it's called. And that means getting rid of the federal government, getting it, vesting as much power in the people locally as possible. So, while we have to have policies of what we do when we get in there, like, for example, I should have said I would abolish the IRS, the CIA, the FBI, the ATF, the NSA, the DOE, the CDC, you name it. But furthermore, I would really encourage this movement of decentralization locally. That's even more important. Nobody's going to go in there and do these things. We're not going to get that opportunity. I don't mean to say we can't win. Of course, I could win, but I'm not delusional either.
I have a question about that. So, and going back a step, so you've won the nomination for the Libertarian Party candidate, and then these two pillars of morality and restraint in the main parties are not able, let's say they're not able to win the required more than 270 electoral college votes to secure the nomination of the presidency. So do you see that scenario as somewhat open door?
One of my fellow candidates is kind of running on that very idea as an object. That would be nice. It would be curious, and if the Libertarian could be the interference there, the kind of the grist in the gear, so to speak. That would be great if we actually could foil the electoral process like that. But I'm not running for that as a goal. I mean, the goal for this campaign is to use this presidential campaign as a prop for spreading these ideas.
one of the biggest. Oh, sorry, Tim, were you about to say something more? Okay. Yeah. Well, one of the biggest things I see in looking at somebody like Millay who just got in, it was the economy is what really got the libertarians noticed, because they were saying something different than what the other guys were saying. And what this brings up, James, maybe you could bring up the visual. So they were hitting 250% inflation. So they definitely had some big issues going on there. But we have our own Mount Doom that we're sort of climbing up. This is the CBO's chart for debt to GDP. And as you can see, this early spike here, that's World War II. And I mean, that's literally what it took to get us through World War II, all that spending where we got to 100% of debt to GDP. Well, we've gotten there, and it's like, again, and it's like there's not much to show for it. And our own government says we're sort of going off the rails. I mean, that seems to be heading up to Mount Doom. And this is just another visual of just the debt by itself, and that steep. I mean, this is the hockey stick. This is the real hockey stick that we have to be worried about right now. Anyways, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, this is insane. We're $34.5 trillion in debt.
Yeah,
and yet you have candidates like RFK Jr. running around saying that he wants to institute a guaranteed mortgage program with guaranteed interest rates locked at 3%. Backed by the federal government. This is insanity. Doesn't he have any recollection of 2008 and the fact that the housing crisis, the housing bubble caused the financial crisis that led to a catastrophe? I mean, come on. This is just Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac on steroids, as he's talking about. These are still, and the Democrats are no better. And the Republicans are no better when it comes to war and all this war spending. This war spending is out of control. All of this spending on the war and on these wars, on these proxy wars, and of course the social welfare state. It's beyond belief. So that's a good percentage of the budget.
Well, and this is what's interesting too, because one of the reasons I like this graph is you can kind of see history in it. And right here, this is 9/11, right around here, and for as big of an event as that was, it didn't do that much. But then here's the housing crisis, like you're talking about, and maybe that's a little bit of the hangover from 9/11.
I don't think so.
What we did, yeah, okay.
I don't think so. This was a function of this insane lending that they were doing through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, especially. It wasn't so much the speculation going on in the market. It was the speculation going on at the government, at the federal government.
Yeah, but then we see this
speculation. I should say they didn't have any forecasting about what was going to happen here.
Yeah, but one of the steepest things we see is this COVID spike right here. It's just like a cliff wall. And oh my gosh, I mean, you think back to what did we get as a society for any of this? And it's just like, I mean,
the amount of money that they created under COVID was outrageous. What was it? How many trillion was it?
I think we went into it around, weren't we around 20 trillion in debt or so when we went into the whole thing?
I think it was 8 or 9 more, right? 8 or 9 more it added, something like that.
Yeah, it's somewhere where I think when Trump became president, somehow I'm thinking we were in the low 20s or something like that, and we're just skyrocketing.
Skyrocketing. Yeah. So makes you wonder what these bankers get out of this. And so I suppose what they get out of it is they get the easy money, which was worth more when they get it than by the time anybody else gets it.
Well, what would your prescription be if you somehow got to be president? Would you say go to sound money? I mean, what would be the Fed?
I'm advocating right now that people get using parallel alternative currencies. What we need to do is we need to erode the Federal Reserve's money monopoly. We need to erode it now. And I would say get into parallel currencies now before, in fact, the CBDC is put in. If that gets put in before we have parallel currency circulating, we're going to be stuck with the CBDC, central bank digital currency, which is a positive nightmare.
Yeah. Because then, of course, they'd be able to, just like they did in Canada, just completely shut you down, your speech
Yes.
and everything if you're not
Everything.
going along with the plan. Yeah. So, well, that does talk a little bit about the economy. As far as the schools go, I mean, we saw the pandemics just as though our schools were performing well before that, but they wound up even performing worse.
Yeah.
And I just, I think, well, what would a Rectenwald, policy be toward the schools? Would you be pushing for, school choice, just get rid of the government monopoly? What would your sort of direction be if you had the...
Well, it's very radical, but just to start off by talking about getting rid of all federal aid and grants to schools, and including student loans with higher education grants and loans, getting the state, starting to pull the state out of education, rolling it back so that public education becomes a relic, and we have privatization of education. That's the ultimate. And now charter schools, I don't believe in school vouchers, because what that is a means for the state to get control over a developing market, which is disaffection with the status quo. And now you get those people that would have otherwise completely deviated from public education, you get them back under state control. Charter schools are chartered by the state. They're also controlled by them. So I don't go for it. Even if they're putatively private, they're being run by the state. So I'm not for it. I'm for privatization. And you can't do it immediately, And then I really don't think there should be government compulsory education, that you have to go to school in a certain way or certain places or to certain ends. That is ridiculous. I think parents should be able to determine where kids should go based on some feedback with the kids, and they know their kids better than anybody.
Yeah. Well, and maybe as a half step on the way to the ideal, maybe something like school choice with no or very few or to little state standards, just pure competition.
Yes. I mean, just stop quit taking the taxes out of people at the property tax level. Just stop it. Let them, the people that need to go to school will take the money they would have had stolen and they'll spend it on a school somewhere. And the people that don't have kids in school shouldn't have to pay it. So whatever portion of the property tax is school tax, cut it and let these people keep the money and spend it on private schools.
Yeah. It just seems like certainly that seems to be where the libertarians would like to wind up. It just seems like somehow we need a stepping stone to get there.
Stepping stone is localized control. So getting the federal government out of it, localized education, that's a stepping stone towards privatization. But I don't go in for school vouchers or any of that. I think the idea of school choice, yeah, sure, we should have school choice, but the choices shouldn't be dictated by the state, and that's the problem with that. I think the choices should be derived out of the market. I mean, I really believe that the market solves these problems.
Yeah. Certainly,
we suffer as a country from a lack of faith in the fact of the market's viability and its capacity to address needs. That's the real bottom line.
I almost think of it as too much faith in government solutions because
it's the same thing. But the lack of the too much faith in government is based on the lack of faith in something without it.
Yeah. And the schools, to me, are a big part of that problem, because right now, when you have government monopolized schools, the solutions kids tend to be indoctrinated into are almost all, hey, wouldn't it be great if we voted for the government to do this?
Exactly. They make them into good little statists. It's an indoctrination factory. And it's not indoctrination just into what, like the right says they're trying to make them woke. Well, wokeness is just a form of statism, frankly. It's just it's a certain characteristic of the state. It isn't anything but that. So it's statism they're being indoctrinated into. They're being indoctrinated into the idea that the government is absolutely essential and it's benevolent and it's needed, and we must, in fact, we should serve it and we should try to get served by it. Things like that.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about censorship before, so I think I'll probably skip that one because I don't want to take too much of your time here. But on another issue, okay, let's talk real quick about it.
I like that topic a lot.
Okay, let me bring that one up. James, can you bring up the visual real quick? Just to remind everybody, during the COVID, we literally saw the mask of the state come off when we found out that they were covertly censoring people through social media companies and trying to give directives over what people needed. And this is a Reason article that shows two of the journalists who were really in on that, uncovering the Twitter files, Taibbi and Schellenberg. Yeah. So those two guys, but we also saw that they tried to overtly set up a ministry of truth with Nina Jankowicz, and we talked about this on some of our recent shows. We even showed the video of her singing her little tune. I won't torture anybody with that again, but where she sang to music, how she felt about censoring people, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. But the crazy thing was, this is what shocked me about this the most of all, was that had it not been for that outrageous clip that was going everywhere, they might have convinced everybody that they needed to censor people through Homeland Security. And that's
they never stopped. This face of censorship that we're going to put up, the Ministry of Truth. I forget what the formal name was now.
The Board of Disinformation, I think, in the Department of Homeland Security.
The Board of Disinformation. Oh my God, you can't even name this shit if you were an Orwell himself. Yeah. This is just unbelievable. So the Board of Disinformation. So the activities that the board was going to undertake are being undertaken anyway. They never got rid of that board. They just got rid of the face of that board, this lady, plus the name and so forth. They were showing their cards too much. So, but they're still doing what that board was going to do.
Yeah.
And then
as if you were to get to be president or to be on the national stage telling people, what would your message be about how should we make sure that this isn't going to happen again? I guess
we got to cut the strings between social media and the government. It's that simple. We cannot allow the government to be dictating to social media and to get them favors in return, no doubt. Keeping alive the section of the Communications Act that I forget the name of it right now, but it's late. It's not that late, no worries. But was
it 232 or something like that?
230.
230.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, it's 230 that lets them off a hook as publishers, and they keep threatening to revoke that, which would basically shut them down. It would shut their business down. So I would say we got to cut all of these connections between the state and these companies, and also just this goes all the way back to the very inception of the internet, which you probably know was Project ARPA. It was not it was a Defense Department project in the first place, and of course the CIA funded a lot of the research around the development of Google and other search engines, but all other technologies, Microsoft stuff. And so these things have been part of the state for a long time. And these have been so enmeshed into the state that it's hard to tell where one begins and the other ends. So what I say is we got to cut all those ties. No grants, no contracts with social media companies, no contracts with Google. No government contracts with any of these companies, and because that is what makes them state apparatuses. That's what makes them bend to the will of the federal government when it says, when it sends over the DOJ to say, you know, pull that tweet, get rid of that guy, blah, blah, blah. That's because they're beholden to the state. If they weren't beholden to it, they wouldn't have to do it.
Yeah, it certainly seems like, you know, the more we shrink the state, the better everything gets. Just
Shrink it or smash it. I prefer smashing, but yes.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, it's not about doing damage to people. It is about doing damage to this edifice that is so onerous and so oppressive.
Yeah. Well, let's jump to another topic I wanted to touch on, because this is one that we can't help but see, and it certainly was one of the biggest topics until it sort of became overshadowed by all the other disasters. And it's almost like I feel like we're going through the plagues of what was it, of Moses, you know?
Right?
The Egyptians here.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely awful. But the homelessness, James, can you bring up the visual? So this is an article from Cal Matters, and I tell you, this could be just about anywhere in California. You can find these types of scenes, and I just it makes me so sad, because I've lived here all my life, just about, and I tell you, I would never imagine that we would have gotten to this place.
Look, here's the thing: this government would be fine if they were taxing some of us to pay for the housing of these other people, and creating more of these other people by virtue of continuing to increase our taxes. They don't mind if half of us are living in trailers and the other half of us are paying for it, as long as it bolsters them in the process. That's what they're doing. That's what, and the more money you put, this is an economic law, the more money you put towards something, the more you're going to get of it. So the more money you throw at, you know, homelessness or drug addiction or whatever on the streets, you know, the more money you throw at it, the more you'll get of that very thing. Because if you create a program or something like that from the state, these people, this will create a demand for that program.
Well, you know, and Michael, I have a really short video clip that I think shows exactly what you're saying here. James, can you bring up KOL number 3? I think that's the one we accidentally put on earlier.
California spends billions of dollars every year to reduce homelessness. Now some lawmakers want to know why it isn't helping. Cal Matters with the story today. The state auditor looking into where all of the money is going, even as the number of unhoused goes up. It's a bipartisan audit. It will be the first of its kind and will look into spending on programs like Project Homekey. They also hope to find out how much money goes to administrative costs versus providing services for people. Since Newsom has taken office, more than $20 billion have been spent to reduce homelessness, but the number of unhoused has grown by a third. A different study found that the $10 billion California spent between 2018 and 2021 helped as many as 570,000 people, but many did not actually get housing. The audit itself will cost $740,000 and is hopefully going to be completed by October.
So spending $1 million to figure out where the 20 trillion went.
You know, this is really unbelievable. So they're literally going to create these people by virtue of taxing people to pay for the already homeless. They don't care, because as long as this builds up their bureaucracy and they keep getting a check, and the more money is allotted to this, as long as they have a sufficient tax base, or the Federal Reserve, you know, producing money out of nowhere, they'll keep doing it, and they'll grow that as large as they can. Believe me, look, they have no compunction about growing it. Look at in California, look at Newsom's policies, and they keep growing this problem. They have no compunction about growing this problem. They could stand straight face in front of you and say, we have the greatest policies in California. California is on the greatest economic foothold of any state in the country. We're X amount of percentage of the economy, blah, blah, blah. And he actually takes credit for the part that he's trying to destroy. I mean, it's incredible.
Well, the crazy thing is when he came into his mayoral office about 15 so years ago in San Francisco, he had a 10-year plan back then to end homelessness in San Francisco. And of course, it's exploded throughout the whole state at this point. But it's
there's nothing worse than a government official having a plan to fix something. Nothing is worse than that. That's actually, when you hear about a plan, start to run, because there's nothing worse than a plan by these.
Well, the sad thing is, though, that they've done so much damage with their plans, and then if we ever did get onto office like a Milei, what could we do about it? I mean, certainly we want to stop the spigot of their ideas that are causing this. But
if you're at the federal level, you're controlling the federal budget by virtue of the fact that you're finally signing off. You would make sure that the entire faucet heading towards California is absolutely, all these states like this are cut off, that no federal funding will support this madness. Starve off the state itself. Let it wither, let it die. This is the only hope.
And then maybe private charities could step in,
of course
and yes, exactly.
I mean, once you have like the kind of cornucopia of wealth which the state is currently sucking out of the body politic right now, once that wealth is left in the system to grow, and I mean in the economic system, not taken out by the political class, once that money is in that economic system, that capital creates more wealth. And everything that's produced creates is its own demand. So this is how the economy works. But what they're doing is actually utterly crippling the economy.
Yeah. Well, and a related issue to homelessness is this huge immigration push that we've had recently. And of course, that's a dicey issue for libertarians as well, because the issue is here we have this mismanagement of all of these incentives that may be perverse, and yet we hate to restrict the motion. But let me bring up a quick video just to show the scale of it. James, can you bring up KOL number 4?
Back here at home to the crisis at the southern border. Record numbers of migrants crossing over this week, and our team was there today as busloads of migrants were released onto the streets in Arizona. Our Julia Ainsley is there.
Tonight, Customs and Border Protection overwhelmed by an unprecedented number of migrants crossing the southern border. Nearly 50,000 undocumented migrants crossed in just 4 days this week, shattering records never seen before. The record levels pushing border stations past capacity. In Eagle Pass, Texas, migrants crossing dangerous waters and waiting by the hundreds to be taken in by Border Patrol. In Arizona, agents dropping off migrants in downtown Nogales to free up space.
So what would you do to undo all of this terrible damage that our current policies have been causing?
Well, what it is there's several factors that lead to this crisis. And it is it's actually a humanitarian crisis. You see these people waiting across rivers. And then they end up sleeping on the street. This is the humanitarian crisis. What's causing this humanitarian crisis is the government. So the government's policies, starting with the war on drugs, which creates the cartels and the black market that they operate in. Then continuing with the foreign policy of interventionism, which creates and displaces people from all over the world. Then, of course, the trade barriers that you erect to various countries creates these crises. I would call off the whole, the embargo against Cuba instantly. And then, of course, you are incentivizing this with social welfare. And this is the most proximate cause, is the incentivization of immigration through social welfare. Once you stop that, turn that off, you'll see that demand decrease, because this is artificially stimulated demand. That's what's going on here. So shut that off, you'll see that demand dissipate tremendously, and the crisis will not be a crisis. Then it'll be a political and philosophical question. Right now, it's a crisis, but when we get it to calm down by virtue of ending the war on drugs, ending our interventionist policies, of course, lifting all trade restrictions, then stopping the social welfare. These things together, this puts the thing now into the realm of like, okay, we can calm down and now deal with this.
So the main thing is that we shut the distortions down on both sides of the border. Then that's
right now. For example, in the last 2 years alone, the program is called Refugee Resettlement, Office of Refugee Resettlement. They gave $20 billion in 2 years alone to NGOs to distribute to these incoming immigrants. This is just crazy. They're stealing from the taxpayers to give money to these people to come to this country to effectively, well, in many cases, they're violating private property rights. Often they're crossing over on private property. So they're actually committing a NAP violation. And likewise, and these people are actually paying for this. We're actually paying for this. It's insane. So we're paying to be ingressed upon, to be infringed. That's what's going on right now. And I think the ultimate solution is what I advocate is an invitation-based immigration policy where you have companies and individuals and groups inviting immigrants and vouching for them, taking out either like a bail bond or something else, like something analogous to a bail bond or an insurance policy. And you can bring as many people in as you want, as long as you take ultimate financial responsibility for what they do. If they destroy somebody's property and so forth, then you have to take liability. I don't think legal liability, that transfers the agency from the inviter to the invitee. That's not right. They have to be responsible legally for what they do, but not materially. I mean they are, but these sponsors, as I'll call them, they need to be responsible for these immigrants.
Okay, and it sounds very much like in Dave Smith's arguments recently in a Reason discussion that he had with somebody. I think we had the Cato line or something where just let them all in versus let's slow things down until we solve the problem.
Yeah, Dave has said things kind of, I think, sometimes it's hyperbolic and sort of, I think, intentionally over the top. But we agree in principle. He'll say something like, bring all the troops home from all 850 bases and put them all at the border. I don't agree with that. I don't want to militarize the border, okay? What I want to do is privatize the border. That's really what I want. Privatization of the border, or borderlands.
Okay. Yeah, and just people have to have permission to go over the private property, and maybe there'll be a few areas where the government owns a few roads going in and out, and people can potentially come in there too, I guess. Okay, well, this does bring it. You sort of segued into another topic that's probably pretty quick here, but I assume you're not a big fan of the U.S. military footprint around the world. And James, can you pull this visual up? You mentioned 850. This is an article. It's about 3 years old from Al Jazeera that shows 750. And oh my gosh, I mean, it's like, how can anybody call this defense when we literally have bases all over the globe here? So real quick, your thoughts on military industrial complex? And
yeah. I mean, all this, I would pull all these troops immediately. They have no business there. All of our military efforts should be only on defense, period, and defending the actual sovereignty of the country from invasion. That's it. So I would pull all of these troops, and the whole political foreign policy of this country, its military foreign policy, is just ridiculous. This is outrageous. So we go around creating all these enemies. We create all this enmity, and it's all for the military industrial complex, as you alluded to. That's who's getting the money. It isn't about winning anything either. They just need conflicts so they can divert tax money into the pockets of the military industrial complex, or put us further in debt by producing it out of thin air.
Okay. Yeah, it certainly seems like I think that's the one area where almost all libertarians are kind of united in all their views.
Oh, yeah.
Let's shrink this military industrial complex.
Frankly, we're united we're united on a lot of issues. There are some issues that we're definitely split on. But I mean, in terms of the campaign, I do want to add this. We're all friends. So, I find them all great people.
It's good to know that we're not going to see a Biden and Trump. I'm going to take him behind the bar and then beat the crap out of him. Yeah.
Wasn't that Trump and what's his name? Chubby. Crystal.
Oh, Chris Christie.
Krispy Kreme. Yeah, those two were going at it. They were going to hit each other. Which one? I forget. I don't know if it was him or somebody else. But it's a circus, right?
Yeah, that is one of the nice things about the Libertarian Party. There does seem to be a bit more civility. Although I will say, when they had
there's more rank and file tension than there is candidate tension. I would say in the rank and file there is a lot of fighting. It's in the candidates. We're the civilized ones.
Well, the only real incivility I think I saw at all was, in the California Libertarian Party convention, there was a debate that you were in, and they had RFK Jr. on the stage too. And somebody got very upset in the audience that RFK Jr. was on the stage, and he let everybody know about it. And I think they escorted him from the room.
Oh, they more than escorted them. They took him out in a headlock.
Oh, okay. I only heard Larry Sharp directing them. Get that guy out from the stage.
Yeah, there's a long story there. I mean, there's a long story to this in terms of not that so much that guy's response, but the whole situation. The debate, it had to be called a round table. It wasn't allowed to be a debate. Then when I got there were these ground rules. And they had to be observed. You can't accuse him directly of anything. Okay, whatever. So he has to be exempt from critique. You can say things, but it can't be directed at him. So this was Larry Sharp's rules. And then we later found out Larry Sharp was on his payroll. So.
Okay. That's too bad. I definitely there's a lot.
That's all I'll say. I'll leave it at that. That's just stating facts.
Okay. Well, speaking of another contentious issue, and this is pretty much, I think, our last big issue here to talk about, but is the environment, this sort of war we have, green versus everything else.
Green versus mean.
Yeah. And Jane, maybe you could bring up the visual here. So, this is one of the places where we're seeing it most front and center is a lot of the EV edicts that we're seeing coming around the country. But, we saw this too at the beginning of the Biden administration, a marked difference between, it's funny, we talk about them being a duopoly, but on a few issues, there are some noticeable differences. And one of them is the whole, I guess, climate war, I guess you'd call it. Yeah. And of course, right when Biden came into office, he killed the Keystone XL pipeline, which, there might have been some, potentially good reasons, but he was already saying well before, hey, this is about ending oil, period. So there's not really much but what are your thoughts on the whole environmental issue? How far do you think government should wade into in what some respects is a bit of a commons in some areas, like things like the air we breathe and other things like that? Where do you think government should it have a role at all?
Okay, I was basically asked this question in that debate with Kennedy, and I'll sort of paraphrase what I said, and I'll say basically, for all intents and purposes, the same thing. There was one time there was a country that had nothing but state property. And they were the sole wardens of this state. They were the sole caretakers of this state. What did they do? They had the worst environmental record in the history of the world. Okay, so what I'm getting at is the state is the worst custodian of natural resources that exists, period. Privatize everything. Then you have actual protection by owners of various things. Now, Kennedy said in the debate, would you privatize the air? And I don't mean to mock his voice. I'm just kind of squealing. But
that was a pretty good mock of his voice, though.
Yeah. But I didn't answer it because I said it was a non-starter. But what I should have said is that air isn't a scarce resource yet. The government hasn't gotten control of it yet. But right now, it's not a scarce resource, so you don't have to privatize that which is not scarce. Property only pertains to scarce resources, period. So the state is the worst custodian of natural resources. Likewise, I don't believe in the EPA or the other regulatory agencies involved in it. We need to get the state out of this. It's no good at it. It's actually destructive. The climate change thing, I call it climate change catastrophism, because this is just a pretext for these people to exercise greater and greater control. And I'll leave it at that. I've actually, like I said, I have a PhD in history of science. I actually do take on the climate science directly in one of my books, in The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty. It's the flimsiest science imaginable. Okay, I'm going to go to the heart of this. I think it's necessary to attack these things that people take as premises from which they operate and as givens. This science is flimsy beyond words. It is unbelievably flimsy.
Yeah, and I guess this is where maybe what happened during COVID maybe should put us all on a bit of alarm about, I think a lot of people probably have a lot more faith in the science of climate change until COVID hit, and then they saw the way that things were manipulated during COVID. So I know that certainly,
if they're lying about that, they could very well be lying about this. And I'm not saying they're lying knowingly. I think most of the people probably believe this. I don't think they're like, oh, let's get them with climate change. Most of the people actually believe it, and but they see it as an opportunity. Just like, Klaus Schwab. You look at the guy at the World Economic Forum who is driving policy into the state. He's basically suggested that we need a global crisis to have global governance. Yeah. That's what they're looking for.
And of course, it's the Great Reset. The idea of essentially all kinds of issues like scarcity of whatever resource they're talking about means we need to move away from meat to eating bugs to reducing our footprint in so many different ways.
Yeah, they want us. They want us. It's funny you mentioned the bug thing, because I'm going to be cutting a commercial tomorrow, an ad, in which I say they want us to eat bugs. They want us to eat bugs. So, I mean, it's crazy, but it's true.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. This is about the time in our show where we start to wrap things up. And this brings us to our Knucklehead Noise Patrol, which is on this very topic of the craziness of the science around here. So we recently found out, and James, maybe you could bring this up, on a show called The View, which we've derided a few times on here.
A show called The View. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, Barbara Walters. I imagine I can't believe she's proud of where this show has gone anymore. But one of the co-hosts on the show, in fact, she's an attorney, so they usually bring that up to make her sound more credible. And she literally, when she actually said that she thought that the eclipse was one of the signs that climate change was real. And Jane, maybe you could play that clip. It's KNP number 1.
Karen Dupiche, our wonderful, wonderful makeup artist, when the earthquake was happening, she put her coat on and she was like, Jesus is coming. I'm out. I'm out. I'm leaving. We've got a solar eclipse. We've got the earthquake. She ran down the hallway.
The rapture is here.
The rapture's here. And then also I learned that the cicadas are coming.
Cicadas.
Cicadas.
Although I love
for the first time in like 100 years.
No.
Two different. Well, this is what I read. Two different times.
Two different kinds of cicadas.
Yes, two different times are coming.
The good cicadas and the bad cicadas.
But for the first time in many, many years.
No, every 17 years this happens.
Well, that's not what I read, but maybe you know, maybe you know better. But
in
I
a
will
way,
say all those things together would maybe lead one to believe that either climate change exists.
That's more
or
the
something
point.
is really
Except
going on.
returning.
Earthquakes are not at the mercy of climate change. It's underground.
It happens, and the eclipse. They've known about the eclipse coming because eclipses happen.
So there you have. This is a place where a lot of people go to shape their political views, and you can see climate, religion.
This woman is so stupefied.
Yeah.
I mean, really, she is just an utter imbecile. I mean, I can't believe they have pay this person to talk. They got to pay her to shut up.
Yeah, they've had some recent embarrassments, but just to say, we're not picking on just television talk shows. We recently had Representative Barbara Lee. I can't remember if I'm getting her complete name right, but we'll see her name come up in the clip. James, maybe you could bring this clip too, because this all shows that the science views that our representatives and the other half are absolutely scary, and they're trying to steer massive policy in our country. James, can you play KNP number 2?
And sometimes you've heard the word full moon. Sometimes you need to take the opportunity just to come out and see a full moon is that complete rounded circle, which is made up mostly of gases. And that's why the question is why or how could we as humans live on the moon? Are the gases such that we could do that? The sun is a mighty powerful heat that is almost impossible to go near the sun. The moon is more manageable.
So the moon is manageable, made of gas, largely gas.
This is scary beyond. This is so scary. What are these people? Oh, the moon is a gas. Could we live in it? Oh my God! They don't even know what a gas is. Apparently, I don't think they know what these words mean.
No, it's absolutely shocking. But just to show you, we're not even cherry picking there. We have one other clip that we have from a representative saying something even wilder about what we would think is earth science. James, can you play KNP number 3? This is a congressional testimony here.
I don't have the exact dimensions, but to your point, sir, I think Guam is a small island.
Very small island, and about 24 miles, if I recall, long. So 24 miles long, about 7 miles wide at the least widest place on the island.
I don't have that figure with me, sir. I can certainly supply it to you if you'd like.
Yeah, my fear is that the whole island will become so overly populated that it will tip over and capsize.
We don't anticipate that.
So, that was Representative Hank Johnson, I think. He's still in Congress, by the way, but that was from a few years back.
These people were all educated in the public schools. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
These are all victims of
educated.
Yeah, these people have been their minds have been utterly polluted. I don't even know what to say. They don't.
Well, I was just going to say too, you might have noticed there was a cut in that clip, that last one, but that was because he rambled on for about a minute talking about the dimensions of the island, as how that had anything to do with it potentially tipping over.
Tipping over. Wow. And I guess the turtle underneath will feel it when you fall down his shell. And then
we fall off the edge.
And then the turtle under that will also get it. And so on and down the line, all the turtles all the way down.
Well, that's certainly a condemnation of and being a science historian, this must really just spin your wheel.
The scientific illiteracy on display is so stunning that I am almost left speechless. It is unbelievable.
Yeah. And this really hits home too when you hear these arguments about climate change from people who are literally saying existential threat on the one hand, and then they have made it near impossible to adopt something like nuclear that is essentially a carbon-free solution. And we're actually coming up on fusion pretty soon too. So
yes.
So
sure.
yeah. So I mean, these are Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, let these technologies develop. And listen, I'm not saying don't make renewable energy. What I'm saying is let it compete in the market. And I don't believe that the crisis is real. I actually think more providentially, I think we were more providentially situated on Earth than allowing the possibility of our destroying the planet using the resources there. I just don't think that's, in other words, I don't think we were put in that predicament to begin with.
Well, I think that's probably a pretty good note to end on. And I wanted to give you a chance to, is there anything that you wanted to leave the audience with? And also to maybe a final thought too about maybe from this run, is there something you think the Libertarian Party could be doing better to promote you guys, to give you guys a better chance of winning too? I just, sort of from somebody who's in the trenches, that might be an interesting, observation to leave us with as well.
Well, I have a lot of recommendations for how I would run the primary differently. I would, abbreviate it extensively and have regional debates rather than having, there's a tradition. They want you to go everywhere because, it's just very expensive. So it's a very expensive proposition. I think the money could be better spent. And then I think the party is, has been under sabotage from its previous administrators or the previous holders of office there. So that's something else that's not often talked about. So the party has really been somewhat hobbled by some of these things, and that's not their fault. But I think I think maybe move the primary earlier. The convention earlier, and get the candidate in front of the public, the broader public, sooner. Because they're not going to pay attention to any of us really that much until there's just one, till we have a nominee. So I think
that is a good point too, because you mentioned that, and we already see that like RFK is out there. Oh gosh, I can't think of the other guy's name who's also out there.
Cornel West.
Cornel West, yeah, that's him, and of course the gal, exactly. They're all out there and maybe making some ground right now while we're all sort of still working out who's going to be the voice, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been trying to poke through that, and that's a good way to put it. Who is going to be the voice? That's the big question, and so that what I'll leave the audience with, if there's any LP members out there, I don't know. How much of your audience is like LP, you think?
I think that we have this public access audience, so we're hoping to turn them into LP people. I don't know how many of them are card-carrying members.
Yeah. So anyway, I'd just say that, kind of closing here, that I think I'm best positioned to lead this party in the general election, because I'm going to get the boldest message out there that we have, and that's necessary. We need to put that as a North Star that we aim towards, because that'll keep us going in the right direction. Whether you believe in limited government or the abolition of government, The point is to put the abolition as the goal, and you can't miss the mark of menarche on the way. So I think that we need to have a bold speaker, somebody that's really out there, that's been on major shows. That's me, and I think it's going to happen. And I'm very much excited about all this.
Okay. Well, James, can you bring up his pages real quick too, just so we can remind the audience? It's Rectenwald2024.com. That's his campaign page. You can also go to michaelrectenwald.com and see some of the videos and other links that he has there. And of course, he also has a page on the Mises website as well. So these are all places you can go connect and find out more about him, and maybe, go and support the cause. So thanks again so much for joining us, Michael. And for all of you out there who are watching, we're going to keep bringing good guests to you so that you can find out what people are doing to move the ball forward for liberty. But until the next show, think about what you can do in your community. We need everybody out there trying to move the ball for liberty, just maybe some way in your community that you can make a difference too. So just consider that before the next show. And until next time, stay tuned and stay free.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at Knuckleheads of Liberty